Right, when you're ready to get started. I don't have any announcements that I can think of off the top of my head, so I'm gonna take a pass this one myself. Anybody else have any announcements you want to give out to the group before we get started here? Anybody? Got any cool stuff going on? About? Well, in case you don't know, I'm Matt Rui. I lead the .NET user group with Brian Olson, who's not able to join us tonight. We'll see him next month. And I'd like to take an opportunity to thank DTN for sponsoring and hosting our meeting tonight. They provided the food and the facility here, so you guys make sure that you thank them and clean up after yourself. Make sure everybody's good. Your respect. Last, like to thank Nate Taylor for speaking for us tonight. He's going to give us a talk about TDD, which is always a fun topic. So I guess without further ado, I don't have anything else to say. I'll turn it over to Tom. DTN, he's going to tell you about a lot of cool stuff.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Well, my name is Tom Strain. I'm the Director of Software Development here at DTN, and welcome you all to our establishment here. Hopefully, the next time we have another meeting, this room's going to be a little bigger. We're going to do some remodeling here. So as you can see, it doesn't set up very well for this size of group, but we've got some remodeling activities going on in the building, and this is one that's going to be hit next. So a little better opportunity to accommodate this many people and actually work in the future. I'm going to go through, I got 3 slides, but I know you don't want to hear the DTN propaganda, but it's important. I just want to make sure we let everybody know who DTN is a little bit, and then also just about some of the technology that we're utilizing here. So I've got 3 slides, and we're going to go through good stuff, but I'm going to go through that first page and then first page. So just want to make sure, DTN, I've got Schneider Electric shirt on. We've been DTN, we've been Telvent, we've been Schneider Electric, we've been DTN, the Progressive Farmer. We got all of those logos going on invoices, so I use practice myself. We truly are, we like DTN. DTN's been around for 30 years right here in Omaha, right? Most of the time right here at 92 Dodge Street for that part. And we're now owned by Schneider Electric. Schneider Electric is a company out of Paris, France. In there, and they acquired us through where they acquired Telvent. Telvent had acquired us about 5 years ago in there. So most of us, we just kind of say we're a Schneider Electric company is how we look at it. Still trying to hang on to that. Tom? Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Hanging on to that DTN name. So what does DTN do? We're a subscription-based service. That's what we've been doing for some 30 years now. And we provide services for delivery of real-time weather, agricultural, refined fuels, and commodity market type information. SaaS is such a cool buzzword out there. We didn't realize 30 years ago that we were starting such a trend. We should have made a bigger deal out of it back then, I guess, and at least coined the phrase in there. Our business is split up into 3 main verticals. The graph showed you there, agricultural and trading, energy and environment. Sorry if you folks over there, a little bad angle in there. On the agriculture and trading, that's really where our business started some 30 years ago. It's all about risk management and decision support services in that sector of our business. On the environment side, it's all about business critical weather. It's amazing. Weather services are, each year, there's an independent agency that goes out and goes after all the weather predictors in the United States, and they analyze the predictions that they made. And you can sign up for this service if you want to do this. And we sign up for that service in there, and the last 5 years in a row, DTN has been the #1 predictor of weather in the United States in there. So now we just signed up for worldwide, a contest basically like worldwide, take a look at that same thing. So we're kind of excited about that. A lot of people think, well, the Weather Channel, the Weather Bud. Well, it's about really the heavy-duty weather. It's a difference of a construction company, for example, going out and making a big pour of cement when all of a sudden a little bit of rain can reduce that entire pour down to nothing. You have to redo it. That's the type of people that buy our services on the weather side of the house. On the energy side, we got some energy folks in here. They can talk about this a lot better than I could. But we're really highly infiltrated into the supply chain of the petroleum industry. Almost every refiner, you name it, they do business with us. It's just that simple. Just a couple of some of the quick bullet points in here. As I already mentioned, we're 30 years in the subscription business. About $190 million in revenue is what we're good for right here at the DTN. A little over 600 employees here. Key thing on our margins, we've got 35% operating margin for you people who are into the financial side. That should impress you. That's really, really kind of unheard of in the business, but we run extremely efficiently here. since we're in the subscription business, one of your key metrics there is retention. You want to have people keep, buying your service. 90% of retention rate, which is really good. Services, again, they allow us to make better decisions. That's what it's all about. Getting information to people so they can make those decisions. And part I put the bullet part of Schneider Electric 2011 that's placed in there. The platform that our products run on, we have about a little over 100,000 customers that subscribe to our services. We have about 10,000 plus concurrent users daily, so we do have a lot of traffic. All that traffic is coming out of this data center that's just actually right across the hall from us here. We have SaaS optimized products and back office applications. Our products are either industry specific or in some cases they cross verticals, like our weather products, they cross those verticals because agricultural, it's just important to know what the weather is, regardless of whether refined fuels use our weather, et cetera, in there. I'll put a plug in for the back office applications. That's actually the group that I am responsible for. And you hear a lot of times when people talk about they support order to cash. One subscription-based business, it's something more than just order to cash. It's about lead order cash, and the most important part is renewal. It's great to make one sale in a subscription-based business, but if you don't keep that company keep paying you money, you're not going to be in the business for a long period of time in there. State-of-the-art data center. Tier 1 facility, like right across here. We've got our backup. We've got a full backup system down in Bellevue. We have, on the development side, we have four primary development groups, if you will. Each of those groups or each of those three sectors, one supporting agriculture products, one supporting the environment products, one supporting the energy products, and then the back office and the corporate side. We have about 150 people in those development groups, so we do have a lot of developers inside this building. If you bring in all of IT, we're about 220 people, I believe it is, with the infrastructure in place, so a lot of activity going on. And primary development language right now, C#, C++, Java, got some Cold Fusion going on, and also People Code. We are an ERP on the PeopleSoft side, People Code really good too. And then the technology utilization. When we look at our projects here, me being more the guy that has to report to the management people, all they want to know is when's it going to be done. Are you on track? Is the budget good or so forth in there? But there's certainly a technology side that I want to make sure that our team stresses. And so when I look at it, at least from a coding standpoint, I cut my teeth on code at Mutual of Omaha. And so that was like talking all you want to know about COBOL, but I don't think we're here really for that purpose in there. But what I did learn really early in my days of coding was the fact that if you can't make something maintainable, if you can't make it scalable, you need to go back to the drawing board. There's incredibly important parts of this business in here. So that's a couple of goals I stress with my team. We got to make sure it's maintainable, scalable. Make sure it's standards based. If there's design patterns out there already established, make sure you're trying to utilize those. So based on some current projects we had, I kind of sat back and galvanized technical architect and said, okay, let's pull out some of the key technology items we've done, like working with in the last year here or so forth. So, and if you've got any questions about it, the technical guys are here. I'm the functional manager. I'm just going to read these pages to you. But once you would utilize an MVC 3 framework with the RazorView engine, that was new technology we just did with a project where we got our first storefront out there where actually people can buy our services online, so we're pretty excited about that. The AutoFact IOC container for .NET, 3 classes as components. That was our first venture in that realm. Entity framework for data access along with Link in there. jQuery to support client-side development in there. IIS7 application request routing and URL rewrite as a reverse proxy to support the architecture. There's a little bit more going on to that one there that takes a while to figure out there. One of our newest projects we got on the slate right now is as I mentioned to you earlier, we were bought by Schneider Electric, and Schneider Electric is a $20 billion company in there. And they have products, they've never ventured into this whole SaaS concept of software as a service. And so now that they've seen what we can do with them, now they've got a bunch of products that they want to actually send through our back office for administrative purposes. So we just are in the process of finishing up a project where we create these web service interfaces, support SOAP, RESTful XML or JSON interfaces using WCF. So we have these different verticals within Schneider Electric, and when you got 130,000 customers, a lot of people are definitely not talking to each other. So we tried to build something, no matter what the technology is, how they want to interface with us, we'll be able to bring that in. So we're really excited about that. Got our first vertical already in pilot, next one's right on the track behind that. And also just got into our first cloud-based web services in there. And then finally, some of our groups, depending upon what team you're on, definitely practice the agile methodology extremely heavily around here, and also do like the team foundation services and such. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what DTN in 3 slides. That's what we do. That's kind of some of the technologies we have in place. So, any questions? Any comments? Donna, nothing? In there. All right. Just the other thing I was just going to mention that in case the restrooms, there's restrooms outside just at the end of each of those corridors in there. And that was the only other thing I want to make sure did. Those doors open. So just in the case of the concept, the possibility of a fire, we've got exits over here and here. So I was supposed to announce that also. So we won't have to worry about that.
I've been told that the exterior doors lock at 7 too. So
Yes, they do. Yeah,
you
so
go
somebody,
outside.
somebody would go outside and we need to come back in. Make sure you get one of us over here at DTN, so we can get the cards and just back in the doors. How's that? Okay, well, that's all I turn over to Nate then?
Yeah, I'm finished.
Good.
Turn over to Nate. Like Matt said, my name's Nate Taylor. I've been writing code for about 12, 13 years now professionally. Amateurishly for a lot longer than that, probably like most of you guys. So tonight we're going to talk about TDD and how it's not just about testing. And I think that's the one thing that, as I've started doing more and more TDD, that I've realized that a lot of people react strongly to TDD because they hear like testing and they hear all this different stuff. And you get so focused on testing, why do I have to write my test before, why can't I write them after, why does it have to be automated, blah, 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 blah. And to be honest, when I first heard TDD 6 years ago, like I was completely skeptical, and I said, this is ridiculous, it's stupid, why would anyone purposefully write stuff that they know is broken just to fix it? Like, I try to write stuff that works and not just break stuff. And so I talked to some of my engineer friends. I have a degree, my background in electrical engineering. So I talked to some people I knew from school. I talked to some people I'd worked with before. And I said, would you ever do anything like this in electrical engineering? And they just flat out said, no, that sounds stupid. And so I felt really assured that I was on the right path because all of my previous peers were right there with me. But as I've dug into a little bit more and started trying it out, started looking at people that are really good at TDD and how they do it, and watching them and trying to implement some of that stuff myself, I found out that testing is important, obviously. It's the first letter of the whole acronym, but it's not the be-all, end-all. So before we get started, how many of you, at some point in time between conception of a application or feature and release of that feature, test your code in any way? Okay, good. That should be everyone in the room. Just to be clear. All right, how many of you guys write coded tests or automated tests of any kind at any point in time? Good. How many of you do it before you write any code or the TDD approach? So some, a few, sometimes. I'll be honest, the sometimes is still me. Thankfully, I'm on a project now where we just started brand new from scratch. We got to do a file new type project. And so we had a little team meeting and I said, we have to test better. And I said, let me rephrase that. We have to test because the previous project didn't really do a good job. And everyone agreed. And so the next day we kind of said, okay, if we're going to test and we have this blank slate, let's see what TDD is all about. So I've actually been trying my hardest over the last month to really put TDD into practice in my day job and not just on stuff I do at night. So the project, what we're going to walk through tonight is a project that we had at my job last year. Big picture, they wanted to do reviews of their salespeople. So they want to know things like how many units did you sell, how many got returned, what's your, how long did it take you to close a sale, things like that. And we wrote this project for them, and by the time the project was over, everyone hated the project and never wanted to see the code again. And so as we were moving on to the next project, I forked the repo
and said, I'm gonna pull this down. Now that I know everything I know about the project, what would I do differently? And so one weekend, you know, I thought it sounded like fun, so that kind of gives you a clue of my personality, I guess, to sit here and rewrite at least a part of this program. And so that's what I did. I went through and I just said, blank slate, I know these are the requirements, let me just go through and try some TDD stuff. Let's see what the code looks like. So we're gonna walk through in the presentation a little bit what the product was, as high level and as abstracted as I can. You know, I'm not trying to, you're not going to know really anything about the product. You wouldn't be able to point any clients or anything like that that used it. But just kind of big picture stuff. And then we're going to get into some code and see like how it looked. And then we're going to write some, I'm going to write some code and we're going to see how we can clean it up. So the first thing we had was we had this brand new project. It was right after a bunch of us were starting at the company. And so we had a team meeting and said, okay, we all come from different backgrounds. This is the first project we've done together. How do you guys like to organize your projects? And so there wasn't anyone saying, this is how we're going to do it. It was more of a collaborative effort. And the four main constraints that we had was we wanted to have thin controllers. So we didn't want a lot of code in our controller. We wanted to have it do the routing and get that to something else to do the processing. We wanted to have dedicated logic classes, and that's what we were going to have to do the processing. We also wanted to have dedicated repositories. So those first three things, we might have an account controller with a logon method that calls the account logic class, and account logic only has one repository, and that's the account repository, so that we can go in and mess with the junk in there. And then we wanted to have generated entities, and that was the closest to any you know, kind of top-down decision. They had an ORM that they had license of for a while, and that the people that were there liked it, and so they said, we're going to use this one for this project, and we'll be open to other things in the future. So those were the four major design constraints that we were given to work with. Kind of everything that wasn't in those was free reign. So what this led to was something like this. You come in, you hit the system, you go to your sales dashboard. That's going to call into your metric logic where you're going to get all of the how many units did you sell, how long did it take you to sell it. And here, I guess I misspoke a little bit earlier. So you'd have a sales repository, which would go out to their, I don't know what they were using in their back office system to get the numbers, you know, so Nate sold 50, Brian sold 10, whatever. And then we had another repository that was going to come to our database, our SQL database, and say, well, Nate was supposed to sell 100, so that he sold 50 isn't a big deal. And Brian's the new guy, he was only supposed to sell 1, so that he sold 10, that's kind of a big deal. And then those would talk to a bunch of entities down here. And so this is kind of like a simple request. A simple request went through all of this just to get done. And again, this is all like before we even created the project, this is kind of where we were coming with the design. So the positives, theoretically anyway, it's easier to test the logic if you don't have a fat controller, because you don't have to worry about how do I fake out HTTP context, how do I handle the user.identity and make sure that I pass in different ones and all that kind of MVC plumbing junk that's in a controller natively, and it's so cool that you can just hit user dot and it's there. Like that's awesome, but then when you want to test that, you're like everyone you have an hour-long conversation with, oh, how am I supposed to fake out the HTTP context.request.headers? You know, can't I stuff that some way? And the simple answer is no, and I think the longer answer is if you want to waste a lot of time, you can. And then the other positive was we were reusing a lot of the data access methods. So when we got business plan, so in this case, knowing how many units you were supposed to sell each month was used on just about every metric. Because they wanted to know, like, okay, you're supposed to sell this many. Now let's see, how many did you sell compared to that many? What's your average? What's all the, you know, so the number that you got, the number of your plan was really important, and it was used all over the place, so we didn't want to keep writing that same code. So it gave us the ability to reuse the data access methods. But there were some negatives. The first one was we replaced large controllers with large logic classes. We really didn't do anything, we just kind of moved it behind the curtain one step, and we said, no, it's not really there because look how small our controllers are. We still had the same problem, slightly less, because now we didn't have to deal with HTTP context and the identity and iPrinciple and all that kind of stuff, but the classes were still rather large. And in some cases, as we're going to see tonight, there was some unnecessary structure. Now, I still am a big fan of, before you start a project, get a quick brainstorm or a long brainstorm. Just get together with the developers and say, here's how we want to structure it. And that's kind of this is a good idea. But for so often in my career, it's been, this is now set in stone. This is exactly what we're going to do. And the problem with that is that you just heard about the project, you're 5 minutes into the thing, and you're supposed to design the thing perfectly based on previous experience that may or may not come into play here, rather than, okay, let's start down this path, and if we need to make changes, we will. So that's kind of those are the design constraints and the positives and negatives of where this project started. So we're going to take a look now at the customer requirements, and I tried to lay these out as much as possible in the way that they happen. So the first week on the project, for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to focus primarily on like a single metric. So the first week of the project, they said, well, we want to see retail sales month by month. So we're going to have 2012, the calendar year, and we want to see almost like a histogram. So we want to see how many you sold in January, February, March, all the way through December. And we said, oh, that's easy, perfect. So we set off to do it. And then 2 weeks later, they said, oh, yeah, we need to know how many they were supposed to sell each month as well. And we also want you to calculate what we're going to call a score, which is basically how did they do against their expected. Okay, well that makes sense. Nothing complicated yet. So we kind of jumped into that and started doing that. 3 weeks after that, they said, well, now that we've got this score, now that you're working on this score, now we want a rating. We want a 1 to 10 and A to F kind of grade type thing for you. So it's not enough to know that you hit 100% of your goal, or maybe you hit 38% of your goal. We want to know, like, where do you rank, or what's your rating? Is that an A? Is that a 1? Is that a 10? What is it? We also want to rank all of our salespeople. So we don't want to just know that you sold 50. We want to, and that that's 100% of your goal. We want to know, did anyone sell 200% of their goal and they're ahead of you, or did anyone sell 0%? And we also want to see all of the ranks in one place. So basically, we want to go to a page, click on it, and see everyone's rank. Again, nothing. These were not bad requests, but as we're getting into this process now, we're like, oh well, shoot, we weren't planning on doing a 1 to 10 rating. And we weren't expecting to do any kind of ranking because when we first talked to you, you said you just wanted to see them on the dashboard so you can see how everybody, kind of see how everyone was doing, and you can bring in the salesperson and say, look at this pretty chart, isn't this, nice how you were doing? And so the trepidation kind of started, right? And we're kind of like, I hope the architecture holds up. 2 more weeks, they come back and they say, oh yeah, remember how we said we just wanted to see this for each month, or for the year? No, we actually want to see it for each month too. So now you've got a 1 to 10 rating for the year, you've also got a 1 to 10 rating for each month, you've got a rank for each month as well as the year, you've got a rating for, or a score for each month as well as the year. And at this point, back one more. At this point, the code's really starting to get too big for what it was, because we made a whole bunch of assumptions early on, like, oh, we're going to just have 12 ratings, or we're just going to have 12 pieces of data and then a ranking at the end. That's not the case. And then finally, they came back in and they said, oh, we know we told you that we just want to sum up a bunch of numbers, but we actually want to have some averages. We actually also want to do some kind of work with calendar metrics and different things like that. And so at this point, I don't think we were really caught up to week 8 yet, and these new requests are coming in, and we're trying to shoehorn them into the right place. And we wound up, we got it done, and it worked. But looking at the code, I think like I said, everyone wanted to just throw it away and say, okay, let's do this all over again. And in my years, in my 13 years of doing professional development on teams or by myself at companies, like there's nothing unusual about this project. Like this is how 99% of my projects go, because people think it's software, it's cheap, it's easy. If we make a mistake on the requirements, it'll take 5 minutes for the developers to fix. And we know that that's usually not the case. I mean, sometimes we get lucky and it is 5 minutes and you can bill for the whole hour, but that's usually not the case, right? Because they're like, oh, it's simple, right? Like today, we had somebody on our internal chat say, oh, I've got this great idea for a simple HTML web page, and he's traveling right now. And so we're just chatting, and we're like, great, what is it? He's like, oh, well, you're gonna need to get the designer in the room. And we're like, well, yeah, it's an HTML page. He's like, yeah, we'll probably need some database back in. And so in a matter of about 5 minutes, it went from a static HTML page to this app that he wants to write that is kind of cool, and I think everyone was on board with it, but that, in his mind, it was like, well, this should take 30 minutes, an hour, maybe half a day if you guys really crank it out. And that's pretty normal, right? And so you build that for them, and then they go, oh, well, now that you can get this far, how hard is it to get this far? And that's where the project starts getting messy. So let's go to the code. So this is kind of somewhat like the code that actually we had. I did some refactoring, really to make it easier. This had a lot more methods in it, and I cleaned up some other things. In taking out the methods and putting it all in one method, it actually kind of made it look worse, but that wasn't the point. But so this is what happened. Like this is to get our sales, and we're looking at, like, that starts on line 5, and we get done here, 60 some lines later. And this was like a single method, for one metric to get the retail, to get the sales. We go through and here we're getting, like, we're just setting up all of our repositories, and we're like, oh, how many sales did this guy have, and what's, let's get all the ranks of everybody, and oh, now, here we can see where we came, the month requirement comes in, because now we're looping 1 to 12, and we've got, oh, well, we better look at our month plan, and our month actual, and our month score, and our month rank, and then we better add a bunch of data points so that this will be nice, and then, oh, here's the score stuff, and let's just kind of shoehorn that in. And actually this one was kind of interesting, or more, I guess, amusing. Typical, maybe is the best word. We only ever want to see the metrics for this year. That was the requirement from day one, until we released. And we released mid-December of 2012. And we told them all going in, like, hey, this is going to hit the end of the year. They're like, yeah, we only want to see for the current year. So what happens January 5th, when everyone gets back in the office? They go in and the dashboard's empty, and they go, hey, where did the metrics go? And we said, you didn't want to see them. Well, no, we obviously want to see last year's metrics. Like, well, yeah, we thought it was a stupid idea too, but you guys kept telling us this year. So we had to come back in, and now we're wedging in if statements to say, like, oh, if it's this year, then, let's do this, now they want to see the year-to-date score. So if you're 2 months in, it's what is the score if the year ended right now versus what is the score if the year ended on December 31st? And, right? I mean, this is normal, right? This is what everyone goes through. And you get done, and you go home at the end of the day, and you think, I don't want to write any more code. You pull up CareerLink and you start thinking about your other jobs. And then maybe you find another job, and then in like 2 years you're right back on CareerLink because it's the same thing. And there's just all this bad job satisfaction because we write stuff like this, and it's kind of our fault, but we don't ever want to take the blame for it, right? And I'm the worst of that. Like, I hate that. I go home at the end of the day and I'm just in a bad mood. My wife, asks, why are you in a bad mood? So of course I snap and say, I'm not in a bad mood. What are you talking about? But it's because I'm writing code like that all day. And one of the things that I'm finding in doing test-driven development, and granted, like professionally it's only been for a month or so, I go home like waiting to come back the next day. So 2 nights ago I left work and I had to go somewhere. I had to be somewhere at 5:30. And I was thinking, like, man, I wish I could stay later tonight and write code. Because that's something that test-driven developments actually help me do, is write code and not read a bunch of code and debug a bunch of code and spend 4 hours in the code to find the one line that I need to fix. And so, it's a 4-hour to 5-minute fix kind of thing, and then you're like, oh, what'd you do today? Well, I spent 4 hours looking for a bug, 5 minutes fixing a bug, and then I did the same thing after lunch. Nobody wants to do that, right? Nobody in here said, I want to go write code because I get to read it for 4 hours. Like, all of us were writing code before we got jobs writing code, and we were like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing ever. I don't want to do anything else with my life. I want to just sit at a computer and write code all day. And so we go get a professional job, and the last thing we get to do all day is write code. So that's what we're going to look at here, is how is TDD to help us get back to what we really love, which is writing code. So the goal for this, and it's going to be, I'm flying kind of without a net. I have the project that I did like in December on my computer just in case we kind of get stuck. But like I said, it's been December or January since I've looked at it, so that might not be much help. So we're going to try and break it down and do a couple little things. I'll be conscious of time. Everyone's got families, but if we can get through all 4, that's great. If not, my goal is to at least kind of get us going down that path, and you can kind of see. Then at the end, we can bring up the other project, and we can go, okay, look at this old code and look at the new code. So, first thing we're going to do is we need to show year-to-date sales by month. We need to be able to show basically how many sales did I have. So we're going to have a DLL project, and that's called cleandd.logic. And we're going to have a unit test project, cleandd.unittests. This is more of a personal preference. There's nothing in them, so nothing up my sleeves kind of thing. We're just going to sit down and we're going to stand up and write some code. I like to separate, well, philosophically really quick, I like to separate my unit tests, which don't actually hit the file system, the database, the web server, any of that kind of stuff, with what most people call integration tests, which do hit the file server, the database, and all that kind of stuff. So not only do I like to separate them from tests, but I like to separate them in different assemblies so that I can configure build tools to say, run these every time I make a change so that it's instant and I can know, yeah, the unit test passed, and then I can say, okay, run these integration ones on the build server, because I don't care if that takes 10 minutes and then you send me an email and say, yeah, they broke. I'd rather do that than every time I try to run the project locally, I have to wait 10 minutes for the test to get done running. So that's why we've got a unit test thing here. So we're just going to create, we're just going to call this one sales tests. I'm using ReSharper, and I've defined a few things just in my own so I have a test template just to get some of the stuff out of the way. I'm going to use InUnit. If you've got Visual Studio, it comes with MS Test. I believe, I don't know for sure, but it doesn't. It's been forever since I've used MS Test. I don't know if the built-in Studio runs, or the built-in test runner runs anything besides MS Test. ReSharper does. Other test-driven.net things do. InCrunch, which if you're going to do test-driven development, I would strongly recommend. It will, while you're typing, figure out what tests are affected because of the code you're typing. It'll queue those up so that when you're done typing, it runs them before you're even able to save the file, and it tells you, hey, this test isn't working, or the line you changed here broke these other tests, and so you don't even have to remember to click, run. I don't have it on this computer, but I do have it at my work one. It'll run InUnit, XUnit, MS Test. I like InUnit. It's more of a personal thing, personal preference. So, first requirement, we want to show sales by month. So, very first thing, if any of you know who Uncle Bob is, he's a huge TDD person, and he will say, and I don't adhere to this completely, he will say you should not write a single line of code without writing a test. So he would have something like sales metric should be class. And so then you would just have to say like, var metric equals new sales metric. And that doesn't exist. And so the first failure of any test is usually, not usually, but sometimes or often is a compilation failure. So we don't even have anything called sales metric. So we're going to go add that really quick. Just call it sales metric. So now we've got our sales metric class. And I probably add the reference. And so then we can just say like metric should not be null. And something else that I like to use is the should assertion library, which you can get through NuGet. And it changes it from being that, which to me is ugly and harder to read. Maybe not for that one, but for some others when you start doing the equality, to that. So it's just more, as you're reading it, you just read metric should not be null. So we're going to hit ReSharper here. It's going to build and run really quick. Where it's going to build and run slowly. This might be an example of why you don't run the updates, Windows updates, the morning of your presentation. We'll see how the presentation goes. I had to power down, and it said if you want to shut down, you got to install updates. And I said, okay, I guess we'll do that.
That's a great feature.
Amazing. I no longer hate Windows 8 for making me reboot in the middle of the day because it wants to. It strictly enforces you're going to reboot in 2 days, whether you like it or not, and then it actually doesn't. As opposed to just letting you. This is set plugged in on my desk for months. So who knows how old the updates were? I'm not good at updating them. So hopefully, hopefully we'll go on there. But next, let's see. So that's kind of a stupid test, really, in my opinion. Sometimes it's good to write them to make sure you get the classes or whatever. I don't want to write a bunch of tests that test setters, So I don't want to write this test. I do sometimes, but I end up deleting it most of the time. So like should set, let's say salesperson name. And then only reason I write tests like this ever about setting it, well, there's two reasons. One, the more I've done test-driven development, the more I go back to my C++ roots and I have more constructors, and I start hating the the object initializing function, because like, I know that there's certain fields in my class that I have to have. Like, if you're gonna be a user in my database, I know you have to have a username and you have to have a user ID. And so why would I let you create something that doesn't have those? You know, why would I let you create a user one like that? So I will create tests like this so that I can shove Bob into the constructor and make sure that that's a required field. And the only other reason I'll write a test like this is so that I make sure that salesperson name is actually defined. So ReSharper is going to take care of that for me. Auto property just to make it pretty. But ultimately, this is a stupid test, right? Because what am I going to do if this test fails? Like, I'm setting it right here. If this line is not set, I don't have any options. I mean, I guess I'll call Matt to hope maybe he's got some friends at Microsoft and they can tell him, hey, there's something wrong way down in the IL because I did a setter and it didn't work. Like, there's no control over that code. I can't do anything if that test fails. So I don't like writing tests like that, because the test should be there not to just write tests so you can go to your boss at the end of the day and be like, I wrote 50 tests. But they should be there to help you progress and help you move your code forward, and not just write trivial, frivolous tests. So we're going to delete this one because I think it's a stupid test. But one thing we do need to know is, so we're going to say sales metric should return 0 sales for, or how about 0 sales when nothing was sold. And at first that seems like a stupid test because, like, we're all intelligent here. Like, yeah, if nothing's sold, it should be 0. But it's not necessarily that straightforward for the code. So we say new sales metric. Then we're going to say metric dot int new sales. We're going to say that should equal 0. Oops, ReSharper being too helpful there. So again, we have the compilation error, so we need to fix that. So we say, let's just say int, and we're going to leave it just like that. Even though I know what I want to write there, we're going to leave it, and we're going to let it throw the exception. Or you could have it return, -1 here or something if you wanted to. The reason I'm going to do that is, oh, wrong window. I'm going to pin this so we can see it. I've got this nice red bar now, so I know at least one test is failing. And the only way to really know if your test is working is if it didn't work at some point, right? Because if I write tests and it works, I don't know why it's working. Maybe there's something hidden going on. Maybe there's some side effect from some other method. So this test is failing, and so now I need to go write some code, and I need to write the smallest amount of code to make that work. So I know there's going to be a lot of things that probably go into this get yearly sales, right? And so it's very tempting to just say, oh, I know what this is going to be. Like, we're going to go out to the database, and we're going to do some stuff. We're going to get sales, and and then we're going to say, like, if the sales this is the problem of writing pseudocode in C#. Like, if sales is equals null, then we're going to do some stuff here, and then we're going to come down here and we're going to do some other stuff, right? And like, before long, you've written a bunch of code, and you don't have any tests to actually verify that what you're writing is what's actually happening. So true TDD says, write the simplest thing that makes the test pass. Well, the simplest thing that makes the test pass is that we just return 0. So we're going to say, fine, we're returning 0. And so then we can run the test again. And we've got a green bar. And so now we have a test that kind of helps us get there. Because all that really did was give us a method called get yearly sales, right? I mean, no one's going to want to go to production with that because everyone's going to have 0 sales. And the salespeople are going to call you up and they're not going to be happy. And managers are going to wonder what's going on. So, and what I found on this project, not directly, but through working with the business people, is salespeople know exactly how many sales they had. The people that don't know how many sales they had are their managers. So when they see I had 15 sales and they know they had 17, you're going to hear about it because they know I closed 17 sales why are they not showing up? I know exactly what my commission check's gonna be. Your guys' system is wrong. So it was just kind of an interesting observation that like the people that don't know what's going on were the sales managers, which was disappointing. So something else I kind of like to do is, I didn't do it on that one, but this is again, personal preference. It's things that you can adopt how you like, but I like to start all of my tests by talking about what is the object under test or what is the method under test. So we're going to say get yearly sales should return 12 when one sale a month. So now we're kind of in this place where we don't really have a way to say sales, like how many we sold yet, right? We only have a way to get yearly sales. So at this point, what we'll do is we'll just say metric dot, I don't know, sales. We'll make it equals new names are 12, or actually this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Thereabout. Make that. Ooh, it's not actually an int. It is.
You need the new bracket.
Okay. I use arrays so often. Did you guys say new int bracket?
Yep.
There we go.
You can leave off the int at that point.
Oh, there we can. ReSharper, for those of you, here's my sales pitch with ReSharper. It's gray if you can see from there, whereas this one's blue, so it's telling you, hey, you don't need this code. Delete it, which is my favorite feature of
Doesn't
ReSharper.
help if you're colorblind though.
That doesn't help. Well, you can probably change them. I don't know if there's colors that you can see, but yeah, maybe not. My favorite thing about coding is deleting code. And so when I can see ReSharper telling me that I don't need things, then that makes me that much happier. And so now we're going to say metric dot get yearly sales should equal 12. And we're going to run that, and of course it's going to fail because our get yearly sales still returns 0. So now we want to write the simplest thing that will make it work. So if we just say return 12, and then we run all of our tests, that's not going to work. That's not the simplest thing that would make it work, because now what's going to fail? The test that says if we don't sell anything, then it should be 0. So now we actually have to write code, and this is kind of where it gets fun. So you say, you can just say return sales dot, say return sales dot sum, and there's still a failure. And so what we find out is this one's failing because the value cannot be null. So we come in and we say, okay, well then let's just and so now everything's happy. So now we know that if some method were to go out to the database, pull in 12 monthly sales, or pull in sales for the year and set them on the sales metric, we know that we can reliably get, okay, how many did you sell? What was the total number that you sold? And you don't have to go in and write like, should return 24 if it's all 2s, because it's going to just do the sum method. If there's something funky going on, or there's some kind of weird math that you're doing, or regular math that's just going to cause some weird outcomes, go ahead and write those edge cases. So like, well, what happens if you're doing an average and the average is 0 or the denominator is 0? Yeah, write that test case. But you don't need to go in and write like, oh, what if I write, what if all the months are 2 or all the months are 3? Because you're just testing the same code over and over again with a bunch of different test cases that isn't helping you get the code going forward. So that tells us now that like the get yearly sales things work, but we don't have any way of actually doing that apart from a method just like this, and that's kind of, that works, right? You could write a repository method or a logic method or something that says, oh, get this data, and convert it to an array. But one, that's kind of messy, we're not gonna wanna write that code, and two, I don't wanna have to see this every time. I don't wanna have to see like metric.sales equals a new array of a bunch of stuff. Like what if I don't have all the stuff right now? What if we only have a few months? You know, and then I don't wanna have to deal with, oh, well, now my array was 6 months and we came in and I had the 7th month, and so now I gotta resize the array and I gotta do all this other junk that I wanna do. So let's write the next method, which is just simply that, like set sale for month should add a month's sale, which is kind of a cyclical definition there. I'm always not always the best at naming my test cases. So we're going to do this again. We're going to say new sales metric. And we're going to say metric set sales for month. And we're going to say month 1. And we're going to say that you sold 12. And then we can test it by saying metric.sales of 0 should equal 12. So let's create this method. We don't need to return anything. This is going to be the month number. This is going to be sales. So run our test. And it fails. And this is one thing I really like about test-driven development, and if you remember at the beginning I said it sounded stupid because why would you write stuff to fail? But I like this for a couple of reasons. One, I like to leave a test broken at the end of the night because then when I get in the morning, I know exactly, like I've already written the test case, I know what the code needs to do next. So instead of the get into the morning, check email, go get some water, see who else is in the office, play around in miniature golf, check out the Nerf gun, see what's on Reddit. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be writing code. What am I doing? Well, where was I last night? Like, I've gone through that pattern before. You know, it's 9:30, 10 o'clock before you write code, and then it's time for lunch. You're like, man, I haven't done anything today. But when you leave a broken test at the end of the night, if I came in and this is my code, I'd be like, oh, well, I need to write something to let me add sales for a given month. I know exactly where I am. I know that I'm not going to be writing more than 2 or 3 lines of code, so let's just jump in and get to work. The other thing is the constant breaking and fixing. Like, it's just kind of it's positive encouragement, it's positive feedback. Like, it's always like, hey, you just did something. You just changed red to green. And no matter how many times you change red to green in a day, it's still a good feeling because you realize that, hey, you didn't just spend 4 hours reading code to write 1 line to fix something. Like, no, you did something. You're seeing it instantaneously. So we've got our method. Wrong keys there. We've got our method now. So we're going to say sales of month number -1 equals number of sale. Run that.
And it should probably fit.
Because index was outside of the range, because when I created this one originally, it was 0. And we know there's 12 months in a year, so we're just going to go ahead and change that to 12 so that we always initialize to a brand, to a whole calendar there. And hey, look, now we have a method that will let us set the number of sales, or set the sales for a given month. Up here, I said we don't need to do 2 and 3 and 4, and that's kind of the same down here, but we do need to do some edge casing. So set sale for month should throw, and we're just going to say should throw. We don't really care what the exception is at this point. When month number is less than 1. So I will say 0. In-unit has, so there's 2 ways you can do this. There's actually a couple ways. So one is you can come up here and you can say there's an expected exception, and it's probably going to be some kind of index out of range exception, and you can just say here's what the expected exception is. So you know what the exception is. So we'll just say general exception because we don't really care at this point. This is kind of more to show you guys. And then you can also do you have some other things in here. So you can say like, maybe the expected exception, maybe you're saying, what's the argument, invalid argument or argument null parameter exception, things like that, where it'll return like, oh, you passed in a null user for this object, and so I threw a null exception and I wanted to let you know it's for the user and not the blog post object. And so you can say, oh, the expected message should say something about a user, and I don't remember what the whole message is going to be, and I don't really want to go copy it from MSDN. So we're going to say match type, and we're going to just say message match starts with or contains or exact or something like that. So it gives you a little bit more control. You don't just have to kind of catch general exceptions and go, oh yeah, something in the method threw an exception, so my test must work. Like you actually get control over what's going on there. So that's one way, and that's kind of the old way. What InUnit recommends is actually this other way, and you don't get to use the should assertion library at this point, but that's all right. Say metric dot so now, when I run this, what I'm saying is, since I wanted to throw that, I want to make sure that only this line is the one throwing the exception. So that way, if you go in, and right now it's, yeah, so here's the actual exception that I wanted. Index, there we go. So run that one and it should pass. It does. So we know that that's working. Now, index out of range exception is kind of it's not the best test case because that's just a native .NET 1, right? And so what am I going to do if that one breaks? Well, what if I wanted to have like a month exception that I wrote myself, and then I could say, oh, there is no month called, February or something like that. Like that's not real. Don't try to pass that in. Or there is no month 0, or there is no month 37. Then you could put your exception there and verify that not only is it throwing an exception, but it's throwing the right exception, and it's throwing the right exception when you expected it to throw the right exception. So if for some reason you had 30 or 50 or 100-line method, and there was a bunch of exceptions in there, you don't want to just say like, oh yeah, it threw an exception. You want to make sure that it threw the right one. So there's that one, and then we also want to say, we want to say the same thing at the other end too. Sale for month should number is less than, or is greater than. So we just say metric sheet. Like you guys watching me type, I always screw up. So we're just going to say 13. And that one through, or that one passed. Because we'd already, like I said, we'd already been using the index out of range exception. So if we wanted to distinguish them, maybe I wanted to say like, maybe I wanted a month too large exception or something weird like that, then this one would fail, and I would say, oh, okay, well, I got to go write that code now to throw it. So actually, since it passed, you can leave it in there, and it's not going to cause any harm to leave it in there, obviously. But you can also delete it, because you know that like the way you wrote the code, you've got test cases that you're already covering just based on how you wrote it. So you can go ahead and blow it away. So at the, and so now we need to say, so now we can set the sales, we can set the number of sales each month has. We can get the total number of sales, because remember that was the first real requirement, was they wanted to know how many retail sales each of their salesperson had for the year, and they just wanted to know like one big number, and then they started breaking it down. So now we need to be able to show it by month. So we have the data, we just need to be able to say, get sales for month should return sales sold that month. So say var metric, sales metric, and we can say metric get sales for month one should equal. In order to do that, I need to say sales. Sales one. int. So we got our month number. We're gonna run our test.
Would be a good idea here to use your set sales for money functions and what happens in there, right? Or do you think is that kind of,
Yeah, that's actually where I was gonna go next, so let's do that real quick.
not bad?
No, you're fine, that's a good question. Because it's something that I struggle with, and honestly, it's something I go back and forth with, and I'll show you why here in a minute. Did I not say?
You set sub 1.
What's that?
You set it for February in your test.
Oh, yeah, you're right, I got you. There you go, Matt, people making mistakes on the fly.
So that would be a good reason to use your method because it uses the same units of measure.
Exactly. So, you've got two options here. Like this gentleman said up front, you can do this way, and or you could do metric.set sales for the month, and you can say I want month 1, and I want to set 2 sales. Oh, I know there's no suggestions away, and it'll return the same result. So the benefit of that is like the guy in the back said, like now you know it's the same indexing and the same logic and everything. And the reason, so I do that some of the time, and then some of the time I convince myself I don't want to do that, and the reason I convince myself that I don't want to do that is because I don't want to test this method. Like I've already tested that method, and so maybe that's okay because I've already tested it, but I'm somewhat paranoid that like something's going to break here and that's going to cause my test here to be broken, and then I'm going to go, well, you know, then I do get into the let's spend 20 minutes to fix a single line of code, which is better than let's spend 4 hours, but it's still frustrating. Like when you get into this rhythm of red, green, red, green, red, green, and then it's like red, 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 and like 20 minutes later you're still on red, and then you're like, your coworkers are like, what is wrong with Nate? He's over there talking to his monitors, he's mumbling under his breath, you know, he's pounding the desk, I can hear his headphones from here, like what's going on? So it really is kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It honestly is, like I'll tell you guys, it's okay to do it this way, but like I have to convince myself that all the time, because like I said, I'm paranoid, I don't want that to break. But I already wrote it, so if I wrote that method using all the other tests, it's probably cool because I've got test coverage, I probably know that that's gonna work. What you definitely don't want to do is to like write this test first and be like, oh, to do that I need a setter, so let me write this set method, and then I'll write this test method, or this getter method, and then it's broken and you're like, I don't know, because I'm writing 2 methods at once, right? So that's the whole point of TDD is like write in small, little tiny increments so that you know what changed. Like you guys asked, yeah, it's perfectly fine, and it's totally, to me anyway, it's totally a personal preference, and like I said, I go back and forth on that, you know, all the time. So, one of the benefits is, one of the benefits of your test coverage, so we're just going to run them, I've just been running like each test as I do it, but there I just ran all 6 against the whole solution, whole one file. But now I know that there's complete test coverage, right? I don't have a line here, well, except for maybe the salesperson name that we don't even need anymore, because that was the stupid test up here, so we'll just delete it. But all of my code is completely covered right now. So if I look at something and I'm like, yeah, I really don't like the idea of sales having a public setter, because I don't really want you guys to be setting the sales array. I want you to be using my method to set the sales array, because maybe I'm going to do something else like set an update date, or I don't know, whatever else. Maybe I'm going to fire off some emails and do a whole bunch of bad side effect type code, and probably shouldn't, but maybe I'm going to do something like that in my method. I don't really trust you guys to pass me in, an array that's the right size, because maybe you're going to pass me in some 14-month year, and then what do I do with it? Maybe you're going to pass me in some 3-month year and try to tell me it's 12. You know, so you can come in and you can say, well, you know, let's set this to private set. And actually, before I do that, we can just say metric. Free interviewing advice right here. Make sure you can write that last line, because I can't tell you the number of people that can't, and it's disappointing. since Link came out, like I get a ton of people, and I've interviewed people at 2 different jobs. I've talked to people like all over the place that honestly say like, I just use 4 each. And I try to explain to them like, well, you can't use 4 each in some cases, or maybe you need to do some kind of computation. And the number of times I've been asked someone, can you write me a for loop from 1 to 100 just to get the interview rolling and get you comfortable that you're sitting in an interview and like let's get the nerves out of the way. And the number of wrong answers is incredibly disappointing. So if you don't know from the top of your head how to write a for loop, that should be your homework tonight before you start with TDD is go write the for loop. So that, especially if you're interviewing, it's just pro bono advice there. So we're going to do metric set sales for the month, I1.
Abstract and an interface. Is that good task
We're going to run all of our tests again. Now, this is another thing that TDD purists, I guess we'll call them, get upset about is changing your tests. And I understand why, and this is more for demonstration purposes for you guys. But once you have a test, like that's like a requirement or a specification, right? So you can come into your test cases and you can be like, this is an actual requirement that I know I'm meeting. And so then if you start messing with your test and like changing your test after it passes, then you don't know for sure that the code you wrote under that test is actually still tested. Like you can get into some weird kind of gray situation. But to show you that the side benefit of testing here, it's okay. But try to do it as little as possible with this. So like I said, maybe we don't want this to be a public setter anymore. So we're going to set this to be private. And all of our test paths. And so I know that by changing it from a public setter to a private setter, I didn't break your code. Like you could have been doing something stupid and wrong with my code, but like my code's still working. I'm gonna still calculate the sales correctly and all this kind of stuff. I'm no longer letting you determine how many months are in a year or whatever else this test case might, or whatever else this object might have. So I now know with complete confidence that all of these methods still work even without it being a public setter. That's kind of a trivial example, but there's others that you can, if this was, let's go back to this code here. This code had some test coverage, not much, but some. I was scared to death to make a change in this, right? Like, the first thing I want to do is like, oh, here's a for loop. Let's take this chunk into a method so that I can clean that up. And then like, oh, well, here's a bunch of other stuff. Like, let's break this up into a method because we've got an if statement there, and maybe I can do something with that. Like, I don't want to touch it, even though it's just taking it into a method and like cleaning it up, because I don't have the confidence that unless I go through the whole site and I have the test plan in one hand, the Word document that's like 55 pages long, and I'm like, yep, that one passed, okay, that one passed, okay. I'm not doing that. Like, I hated going through the test plan when we were ready to release. I'm not going to do it just so I can refactor some code. But if you have unit tests, now, like if I knew this was all working, I could just go cannibalize this however I wanted in small little chunks, run the tests, and as long as they keep passing, I don't have 100% confidence that the website didn't change, but I have like 98% confidence that the code's still going to work, and now I have 2% to test as opposed to 100% to test. And so that's one side benefit right there. And like I said earlier, I am happiest when I'm deleting code, whether it's yours or mine. And so being able to refactor and have unit tests just makes me that much happier. So I'm like, oh, look, I can convert this to a method, or I can convert this to some kind of factory pattern, or I can do this or that, or I can move it into its own class, and let's run the tests. And if they break, I know exactly what I did wrong. And if they pass, check it into Git, push, and go on. Mentioning source control, the other nice benefit of TDD, as a little tangent here, is, and this happened today, or yesterday maybe, we just had some nasty merges for some reason the last 2 days. Something with solar flares or voodoo chickens or something, I don't know, but they've just been nasty, and it's like half an hour, 45 minutes just to get the merges to work, or just to get them to merge and build. And so once you get that, like, you should have this sinking feeling in your stomach, like, I have no clue if this code is right, because I just spent 30 minutes merging Bob's code into mine, and Bob's at lunch, and I don't know what he was trying to do, so I just took my best guess. If you have unit tests, you run the unit tests, and they pass, and you're like, oh, the merge worked. Or they fail, and you go, oh, the merge didn't work. Let me go see what I did wrong. Oh, yeah, I picked file B when I should have picked file A because it had the line. Okay, good to go. And so literally yesterday we had like a 5-minute conversation with some of us as developers, and it was just like, we were just sitting around like, isn't it great to merge with unit tests? And we were just kind of all bask in the glory of testing with unit tests, or merging with unit tests, because we knew it was an ugly merge, but more than likely, it's good to go. And yeah, we still have to actually go test it on the alpha site and all that kind of stuff, but you go in with the expectation that it's gonna work, versus if you were like me, you go into the alpha site 6 months ago and you're just like, I don't wanna find any bugs, like let's just hope, let's head down. I'm not even gonna tell anyone I'm testing, because I don't want anyone, I don't wanna have to admit to all the bugs I'm gonna find. So, we basically now we can see we have the year-to-date sales. Oh, that's one thing so that's one thing we don't have yet. We don't have the year-to-date sales. You can get the sales for the month. But we don't, that's just that month's sales. So that's not really all that helpful unless you're gonna click through month by month. So I'm gonna say public void get year-to-date sales should return total of sales up to and including this. And I don't know if it's obvious or not, but that's different than these method names, right? So I'm not like doing set underscore sales underscore for underscore month. My unit test names tend to grow, they tend to be long because I want to talk about what's going on. I want to talk about the method I'm calling. I want to talk about what parameters I'm passing in, what's the state of the object when I'm testing it, and what I expect to get out. And so if you do that like all camel case or Pascal case, it makes my eyes hurt. So I just do it with underscores, nothing special about it. You can see ReSharper doesn't like me doing it as underscores because it highlight here and it'll come over here and it'll say, oh, I should name this. And I see that and I just say, oh, it's get something this month, and I just kind of block out what in the middle. So that's nothing like, you don't have to do that for unit testing. It's, follow your company's style guide or your own personal style guide or whatever. It's just how I like to do it. So let's do this. Instead of this, like I need this method again, so we're just gonna make that a method in the test case. And we're just gonna say like set all sale or set sales for, and I don't really, like that's fine, we could do it all of them as one, or I could make that a parameter and you could pass it in. So now I have this method down here that I can just say like set sales for the year, and I can just say metric, and I know that that's going to be, there should be 12 months, all of them should have one. So it is okay to have helper methods in your test cases. Like that's perfectly cool. Like the whole point, not the whole point, but part of the point of writing tests and the whole point of this presentation is to make the code cleaner. And so if it's cleaner because you don't have the same block of code everywhere, then go for it even if it's in your unit tests. So now we're going to say metric, get year-to-date sales. We are in July, so we will say we should equal 7. ReSharper doesn't like this one either because it doesn't like my abbreviation of year-to-date, but that's too bad.
Add to abbreviation.
Yeah, exactly. And that is very handy in ReSharper. So what I want to do now is return sales where, or actually, so let's do like and then I can say total equals 0. So another pretty pro bono tip, if they let you use Visual Studio and it has IntelliSense, then by all means hit 4 and hit tab if you don't know how to use a for loop. That would go a long ways. Just giving you guys tips, helping you jobs. Not that anyone here is looking, especially nobody from Schneider, I'm sure. So, so we'll do total plus equals.
That's gonna be the first thing we ask.
Scary how that part sounds like it comes from experience as well.
What's that?
Just being able to tell people to use Visual Studio with Telus.
Oh, yeah.
Almost like you make it usable or not used.
Yeah, we had one guy, this was a long time ago, asked him to write a stored procedure, and in SQL Studio it says you write, like you say, new stored procedure, add stored procedure, whatever the menu item is. It says at the top, like, hit Control-Shift-M, and it pops up, like, that little window that's like, who created it, what's it called, what parameters are you passing in, all that kind of stuff. And the guy sat there for like 3 or 4 minutes trying to type all that stuff out himself, because he's like, oh, I usually use the window, but I can't remember how to get it. And I was like, well, like, it's on the screen. He's like, no, it's not up there right now. I'm like, no, but the command is on the screen. It was one of those kind of things. You're just like, read what we're giving you, and you can hit Control-Shift-M. So now we're going to just loop through and we're testing that file. Hit the wrong shortcut. And method for operations. Looks like it's something. There we go. So that was just ReSharper, hadn't rebuilt it. So now we know that we're getting back 7. But that test, what's going to happen to that test in 6 or 7 days? It's not going to be 7 anymore, right? Because I said, oh, date time now in the code. So maybe what I should do, and since I know this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before about refactoring, I know this method works as of right now, and as long as I'm not writing this like close to midnight on the end of the month, I know I've got some time to write this test and play with this test before it starts failing. So what if I just do like, desired one, since I already have a method name one. So that was another nice little ReSharper one that just took what I put and created a parameter for me, and it even went over here to my test and put what the value was. It knew there was only one place, and so I just threw it in. And actually, if there was 50 places, it would throw it into all 50 places for me. So again, JetBrains is cool. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but they're an amazing tool. So now I can run this and make sure it passes. And it passes, but I still have the same problem. All I've done is move date, time, month from the logic class or the object into my test. And now instead of it being date August under the tested code is now August in the testing code next month. So now what I can do is I can just replace this with 7, and I can run the test again. And now it works. And so you can test, you can test anything. You can test like, well, what if I do pass, what if I pass in, what if I pass in 3 months from now? And then you could do some stuff like, well, if I guess instead of talking, let's just do it. So, in future, because how do you calculate? So you have a couple options here, and this is where it starts to involve the business owners, or whoever did your requirements, or whoever's talking to your customer, or if you're like the only developer in a large company, it's you, because you get to decide all that stuff. But now you get to decide, well, if they try to, for some reason, pass in a month in the future, so they try to pass in, how many sales do I have in November of 2013? Well, do you want to return how many they have, like, actually right now through July? Do you want to return 0 because that's not been defined yet, and so we'll just say they don't have any then? Or do you want to return, throw some exception? So I'm going to be nasty, and I'm going to throw an exception. So we're going to say var metric, new sales metric, set sales for the year metric, and then we're going to say throws invalid, or how about future date exception. And one thing I've started doing more since I started doing more test-driven development and trying to, for whatever reason, I had an aversion to. I had an aversion to custom exceptions for some reason. I don't know, probably somebody early on in my career told me they were bad. But as I try to write code more cleanly, I find that I like them rather than trying to go through and parse some kind of generic exception, like an invalid argument exception, and then going through and looking at the message and saying, oh, it was for this parameter. Like, they're just other classes. Like, there's not any harm in having classes especially when they're super small and all they do is they just derive from exception, and now you have a label called future date exception. Because then if that ever shows up in my database log, I know exactly from looking at the log, hey, somebody tried to pass in a date in the future. Sorry, it broke on you. Like we told you it wasn't going to work. We gave you the exception, right? So maybe this is an API, so it's not like we don't have any control over it. So somebody said, hey, I kept passing in November, and it kept giving me this weird error. I'm like, yeah, it's telling you not to pass in dates in the future. Because I can look at the log and see. If I don't have that, what do I have to do? I have to go into like Elma tables and copy the XML out and put it into Sublime, and then use a package to like format it correctly so I can see the stack trace, and then start going through the stack trace and be like, oh, it's on this line. Let me go to look at that line. What's that line doing? Oh, I bet you sent something in the future. And I can spit all that out in 5 seconds because it's just a scenario we created in my head. But in real life, like that's, what, 10 minutes? And the danger of that 10 minutes isn't necessarily that it was 10 minutes, but it took you from doing something else and broke your concentration.
You can use ReSharper's Stack Trace Explorer.
Right, if it's...
They've got a window that'll turn it all into hyperlinks.
Yeah, for that, right?
Yeah, one
But
more
like
ad.
on client computers where they're like in their system and I'm not allowed, that's where it gets messy. Yeah.
If you've got the stack trace as text.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know that. So now we have another ReSharper advocate back here. So this exception doesn't exist. So just like the other tests, I need to create an exception. I don't want to do it there. So, because I don't want to have the exceptions exist in my test case namespace. So this is how, spelling correctly. That's all I do for custom exceptions. It's just, hey, here's a nice description that I'm going to know what it means, and I'm not going to use it all over the place. It's going to throw an exception. ReSharper picks it up, and we're going to run the test, and it's going to fail because it didn't throw the exception. And so this can be somewhat misleading if you're not exactly sure what it's saying. It's not saying that the method returned null, because the method probably returned 11 since it's actually just summing. What it's saying is you expected this type of exception. There was no exception, so the actual exception type was null. If it had thrown some other type of exception, like, I don't know, what was the other one? Index out of range exception, it would have shown like what was index out of range exception there. So we need to come over here, and we just need to say like, if, sorry, 1 greater than test again. Now it passes. And so if you're paranoid and or anal retentive, like you can spend a lot of time validating all of your input. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but it's actually a good thing. Like, if, I mean, especially if you're writing a public API that you're hoping to get people to use, like you can't, like if you're writing the project I'm on right now, I'm writing a lot of the back end stuff, and the guy that's writing a lot of the front end stuff sits, like I can almost touch him. So like I can say, hey, don't pass that data. And he says, oh, okay, I won't. But I can't do that if it's a public facing API. I can't call up all of my customers and say, hey, don't pass in bad data. So you can test to your heart's content with all the bad parameters you want and have it do whatever you want. So now we've got, well, let's see, how many tests do we have here? Now we've got 8 tests. It took a lot longer because I was talking as we did them. But we have 8 tests, and we know that, we know that every line in this file is covered by at least one test, and in some cases, multiple tests. And so that's the benefit that everyone, not everyone, most people think of when they hear test-driven development is like, oh, we've got great test coverage. And so those are the metrics you drive for. And that's why TeamCity, if you use it for your builds, will say like you have this much code coverage and you're at 98%. And you start getting into that like, oh, I'm going to bump it up by 1% today. Like that's my goal. And that's all good and well, especially if you're writing good tests and you're not writing tests just to write tests. But like I said, that's not the point of this. That's not the point of this demonstration today. So now we've got this sales metric. And so now if I was to use this somewhere, and I'm going to break TDD just to show it as an example, but like, I don't know, we've got, it's not going to actually be a controller, but let's just call it a metric controller or something. Probably shouldn't put parentheses at the end of a class name in an interview, but just more interview tips, I guess, as I go. So we'll have, just array of ends, get this use sales. And so then you can just say, new sales metric, sales. And we can just say time.now.month. Oh, that's right. So there we go. So now you have something like this, and that looks a lot better than whatever it is you're doing over here in 60-some lines of code to get the same number. So when you want to know how many sales did Nate have in January by like this time last year or this time this year, like you've got to come in here and find it and figure out what all's going on, and it's just plain ugly, right? So when we kick this off while we keep talking. So that'll load in the background. So yes, we have complete code coverage. Yes, we have the ability to refactor, which is pretty awesome. But even more than that, we have clean code. Each method is doing one thing and one thing only, right? So get sales month is not doing a bunch of stuff. It's not like going out to the database and doing a bunch of junk and then doing some other stuff and then some other stuff and then somewhere down here off the projector screen returning an int, right? It's like, no, I've got the numbers. Let me just tell you, you want month 1? Okay, here it is. You want month 5? Here it is. Get year-to-date sales is doing exactly and only what it's saying, right? It's getting you the sales for this point in time or for the specified point in time that you're asking for. And so it's cleaner if you use this thing up here. You get a better look at your class because you have smaller methods. You have things you can see like, oh, this class is going to get sales for the month. It's going to get the yearly sales. It's going to get the year-to-date sales. It's going to set sales for the month. In fact, looking at that, what you might actually do is you might just like come in here and you might just say like, get sales for month, I. And then you're reusing code that you've already used instead of going out to your array again. So there's things like that you can do as you're messing around that will let you. Well, actually, let's do that. I don't know if it works, but we'll find out. So yeah, so see now I know. Oh, I broke the code. Like that's bad. So like okay, well, first step, let's set it back to what it was and run all the solution, run all the testing solution again. Now they're green. Okay, so that was definitely the change that broke the code. Now I can start digging into, well, I thought I was doing what I thought, I thought that's what I wanted. I thought those were the same. Why did it break? And you can start looking into why it broke. So this looks like this one's open now. And so I did, here I've got my metric spike and unit test and my metric spike project. And I want to say, like I said, this was like December, well, maybe it was like January that I did this. And I think I did it over like a Saturday and Sunday, and it was probably like 2 hours each, so maybe 4 hours total. So I did a little bit more work, and I wasn't talking to strangers at the same time, so it went a little bit faster. But like, here's the retail sales metric, and what I wound up doing is like, so I've got this retail sales metric, and I've got some kind of base. Like, oh, the base is a sum metric. Because remember, like the last requirement was, oh, we're going to add all these new type of metrics as well. And so now, because I've got these tests, I can start doing like true object-oriented stuff, and I can start like, oh, well, look, this is the same in all the places. Let me create a base class for that. Run all my tests. Yep, that did exactly what I thought. And so here I've got like, this must have been what I was getting ready to test when I quit working on it to go to work. But so I've got, oh, get the actual year-to-date and get the planned year-to-date, and that's gonna, that's gonna be there for all of my retail sales metrics. So now if I want to know, what was this guy's ratings? Oh, actually, that's why I did it, because I wanted to implement that on the actual concrete or the implementation class. It's called get ratings, and so now I know like what does a metric have? Well, a metric's got like 3 things. It's got, you can set the plan data, you can set the actual data, and you can get the ratings. And it's clear because now I don't think I'm using this class anywhere other than tests. Let's see real quick. Yeah, it's just tests. So I never wrote like a wrapper around my metrics, but if I did, it would look a lot more like this than it would like this. Because I would say at least 80%, 75, maybe 80% of this code here that I don't really want to walk through and figure out what it does is duplicated in this code here. And so you've got better test coverage, you've got cleaner code, and so heaven forbid you forget a test case, and it makes it to production, and your customer calls you up, and they're like, hey, it's weird, February of 2012 was a leap year, and you guys, I know I sold 100 trucks on the last day of the month, and you're not showing any of them, and then you can go in and be like, oh, well, yeah, let's write the test case now for leap year, and you know exactly what it is, whereas if my customer calls me up, I'm like, oh, well, I need to come in here and look and, come in here and like, oh, well, here's where it's getting it. Versus coming in here and going, oh man, where am I gonna wedge this code, right? And so this code, my estimate is like, give me a couple days and I'll get back to you. And this code is like, I'll have an answer for you by lunch. And I tell them that to buy myself time, because what I'm really hoping is I have a fix for them by lunch, right? Because I can write the test case, I know what the situation is. Bob sold 100 trucks in February of 2012 and it didn't show him. There's the test case, now let's go write the code to make it run, and as long as it runs and all of my other tests run, I've solved the problem. Let's create a package, get it to the customer. They're super happy. They're amazed that, hey, we use this other company across town and they took 2 weeks to solve this problem. You had it in 3 hours. Plus, I don't hate this code. I don't want to like go home and not think about the computer. I don't want to go home and like just do anything else imaginable besides writing code. I don't get discouraged from writing code. I'm not on CareerLink because I wrote my code like this and not like this. And so it's, as much as tests are a part of test-driven development, it's best for me anyway, to not think about them as being like all-powerful, like that's the whole purpose of writing TDD approach, because writing tests is cool, but this gives me job satisfaction. This makes me feel good about myself at the end of the day. This shows me that I did something throughout the day because I have 41 tests that I know are running on, I don't know, a handful of classes. And no longer than it take me to say 41 classes and they were passing. And so not only do I know I have 41 tests, but like I feel good because I don't have 100 tests and 50 of them are failing when I check out the build. So that's some of the benefits of TD. And so that's really kind of where we're at. Now, let's go here. So what are the benefits? Obviously test coverage. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. But it is cleaner code. You look at people that write test-driven code. When I asked how many of you, tested code, everyone thankfully said yes, they test their code. But when I asked how many people tested, like have automated tests, a lot of those went down, which was kind of sad. But even more sad was how many write tests first. Like, it got down to like 4 or 5 people. So what's the difference? As long as I have code coverage, as long as I have tests, why does it matter? Well, writing tests first, you're writing tests for a line or 2 lines or 3 lines, and as soon as you get done, you run it and you're like, yes, that works. Okay, that might not be the best place, let me move it to the best place. And you're constantly, every 2 to 3 minutes, you're thinking about your code. If you write tests after your code, you're probably like me, and you sit down and you're just like, yep, I'm writing code, and you're just cramming it out, right? And you have like this crazy Red Bull infused blitz of like an hour and a half, and you write like 75 classes and 300 lines of code in each class, and then you're like, oh man, now I gotta test it. Like, I don't know how to fake out this context. I don't know how to do this with the database. I don't know how to do that. Well, I guess I'll just kind of write this test case here, and what you end up doing is like barely scratching the surface. Because you write one test that covers your whole method, and you're like, yeah, I think it covers all of that, but I don't know. Like, I don't know that it's hitting this like line down here in the if. And so with writing your test afterwards, it's you don't get as good clean code. The best way that I can describe it, and I don't know if this makes sense to other people, but how many of you have ever like learned a foreign language to the point where you're taking source material, whether it's French or whatever, and either translating it in your mind or writing it out as a translation? Has anyone done that? Just me. Some people kind of. Okay. So this apparently is a pretty bad example then. Huh?
Well, it's time to learn a foreign language. Cut code, right?
Yeah, you got to write code. You got to steer at it. So a little bit about me, but part of my dissatisfaction with my work in 2004, I left full-time development and went and started to pursue a Master's of Divinity thinking I was going to pursue that, and then I realized like I don't like people enough to pursue that.
Amen, brother.
Just being honest, guys. I like you guys here, and we can sit around and I'll have a conversation with you all night. But like, if you want to do that every night, I'm going to get tired of it, and we'll not be friends for very long, probably. Because then I'll say something stupid, and you'll be like, man, Nate's a jerk, and you'll be right. But anyway, part of that degree was I ended up taking. Oh, that's me. No, you. Okay, good. No, that's fine. I was confused because I thought I knew mine. But part of my degree was 15 hours of biblical Greek and biblical Hebrew. And that's the part of the degree that I actually finished before I dropped out and went back to writing code. But what that meant was like, you take 2 semesters, so 6 hours of just learning like, here's the alphabet, here's the syntax, all that great, fun, exciting stuff. And then you spend the next 3 semesters and they're like, oh, translate the book of John for me, you know, and like, here's your final, chapter 3, go. And so you have to be ready to do it. And what I found in doing that was it forced me to slow down. And so what I translated was far worse than any Bible you'll go pick up off the shelf. Like their translators are like up here and I'm down here, and so like mine was like, you know, having your toddler write out Moby Dick. Like that's what it was like. So mine sucked, but what it caused me to do was it caused me to slow down and look at like how is this sentence constructed. And it didn't just cause me to do it in the original language, it caused me to do it in English too. And so I learned a bunch of English like what participles were, like, because apparently I made it through high school and surprisingly an engineering degree without needing to know what participles were. But I learned them there. And so it's the same kind of thing. Like, I couldn't just sit down with this original text, whatever language it is, and just blow through it and be like, here's what it says in French, here's what it says in Japanese, whatever, here's what it is in English. Like, it's not like just that. It's the same thing with test-driven development. You're not just sitting down and like cranking out the code. You're like, oh, look what I'm doing here. This seems oddly familiar to what I did 10 minutes ago. Let me go look at that code. Oh, it is the same. Let me reuse that code then instead of writing this new stuff. Because it's causing you to slow down. But in the end, you're actually going to speed up because you don't have to spend those 4 hours looking for the one line of broken code in your stack. You've spent 4 hours writing tests. And so, like, you might kind of start off like this, like you and your coworker, like you're going to write TD and he's not. And like at the end of the first day, like he's up here, right? He's got like 500 lines of code written, and you've got like 2 classes that are like 7 lines each. And your boss is like, Nate, what are you doing? Like, look at this guy over here. He's got all this code. But in a couple weeks, it starts to even out. And then once you start pushing things to like your alpha site, like you're cruising ahead, and you're like, hey, I'm ready for my next feature. And your coworker's sitting there going, oh man, where's this at? I can't figure this out. I enter it here, and then it just doesn't make it to the database, and I don't know why. You know, like you're spending all your time on the back end, the part that sucks. Like, I don't want to sit there and read code for hours on end and try to fix it. I want to write code. And so doing TDD, even in my spare time, has helped keep my sanity. And it's helped me to enjoy coding again, so that now when I go home, I don't think, oh man, I don't want to think about code. Now when I go home, I say, I wonder what I can do with Haskell. I wonder if I can pull down AngularJS and play with that tonight. I wonder what I can do with Ruby or Sinatra or Web API or whatever else that I don't get to do at work that sounds really cool. Like now I go home and I create those projects because I like coding again. And so really, like I said, TDD isn't just about test coverage, and it isn't just about testing. It's more than that. It helps you like your job better, and it also helps the company because the people that come in after you, or the junior developers that you're going to hire, they're going to be able to read your code and understand what's going on, which is another benefit, and that's going to help you like your job better, because now you don't have to spend a week with the new guy walking him through your code base. Maybe you spend a day, and he can look at it and he can understand it, because you're not like, I don't know if you guys have been through that. Get a new guy in, last thing I want to do is see a new guy, because that means a week of my time is lost showing this guy how crappy our code is and apologizing to him over and over and over again. But trust me, it's gotten better since then, and it really hasn't. You're lying. So TDD isn't just about testing, and I would honestly encourage you, like, even if you have a large project, a legacy project, it's not too late for TDD. You're going to go to work tomorrow and probably write some new feature or maybe solve a bug, and if you're going to solve a bug, that's the perfect place to start. Take the bug, try as hard as you possibly can to codify it so that that test fails, and then write the code that will fix it, and then you know this bug is fixed, and as long as you have that test case, that bug will never come back. Or if you have a new feature that you're going to write, use that to start architecting your application in a way that will allow, maybe it's just this little part over here that's TDD, and maybe it's just this little segment on this much larger project, but as it grows, like, you'll start having tests covering more stuff, and you can start refactoring the crappy code into the good code. So thanks, guys. Pluralsight just bought Jupiter this morning.
Did they?
Yes. So it's even more valuable.
Yeah, so they probably have all the assets.
Deep code?
Yeah, I think it's-
You don't use those cards once per email address too.
Okay. Oh, and
I
the
have
other,
about 4 or 5 of them, and they wouldn't let me use any of the extra ones.
oh, okay, well, and that's too bad.
So if we got one in the past, one in the past, this one would be a good one.
Probably.
Just get a new email address.
Email address.
Otherwise,
That's okay.
Yeah.
I never know.
Once per email address. Oh, sure.
Yeah, I looked up for that. My company provided me with the choice.
so Nate, do you have any tips for new Minsker manager to let us use TDD? Because that's been my major.
I wouldn't tell them. I don't tell them that I'm going to use a factory pattern or an observable pattern. I just write code. I mean, that's kind of my approach. I try to sneak it in, but I'm also a little bit more devious, I guess, than some people. But I
But I
mean,
mean, in the same respect, so sometimes you have to deal with.
that's the harder part. That's the harder sell, I think. And honestly, the job on that right now is a little meeting we had a month ago where we said we're actually doing TDD. I left that meeting and the next day I realized it was the first time we talked about TDD in the job, and I didn't have at least somebody like
He's in the code
vocally
all the time.
objecting.
and finds
And so
himself
that was kind of
projects.
cool. I mean, there's only 4 developers, so it's a small sample size, but like usually there's somebody that's opposed to
You're
it,
not
like
in
they
your own
don't
call
see their
schedule,
time or
and you screw
whatever,
something up, and I
that's
have to
the
change your
challenge.
stuff, and it's
And
not
so in
fair.
that case, what I would advocate is, as much as you possibly can, do it yourself,
I've been there for 2
and
months,
just kind
so
of quietly go about
my
doing
mouth
it.
shut at this point in
And
time.
in a couple months, when your code is always the one that's working right first time out of the box, your boss is going to ask you why you're doing it. Your coworkers are going to wonder why you always get to do the new features and not the old buggy crap, and they're going to start accepting it more. So kind of like the fruit in the pudding type thing.
Right, so devious.
Devious,
Get your own branch in your source control repository. And
something like that. Yeah.
merge. Just merge the other stuff in. All right, so get this out of the way. So we'll do the Pluralsight cards first. And we're going to Pluralsight. AR is here. That was really close. All right. The other Pluralsight. All right, and for the mobile dev with C# goes to Lonnie. Oh, so close. Almost made it the whole way. G. No? Nobody wants it? It's good stuff. Dan. Alright. It looks like it's like about 50 people in here. I'm surprised. That's what we had RSVP. John. You guys. If we had like 75 RSVP. Sergio. You already have one in your lab. It's Michael. There you go. All right.
How long do you think it will be for the video to go on?
I think I'm about 3 videos behind at this point.
All right.
But anybody want to volunteer to manage videos? Anybody want to do that? You do it? All right, Joseph will you can even, we'll have to see about the my kid stuff's on there too. But yeah, great. We'll get Joseph to do that for the group and put those out. That'd be so helpful. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. It's just a little bit that it takes. It's tough to make it. So all right. So yeah, hopefully within a month or so we'll get it out there. But yeah, pretty good best way. Anything that anybody wants before we part? Any comments, questions, suggestions? All right, thanks for coming. I look forward to seeing you guys next month. Thanks to Dave and to DTN as well.
Right now, I just don't have any specific project.
Because you're always like, yeah.
Pass them into the line. Yeah, it's just off there. Tested them off. That made it best. But I'm trying to sign up to it.
I know. I know.
Like very scratchy surface of those.
Oh, I don't know. Also,
Back we had this our set up our WCF Lots of people there that night. I
It's like that old
faster, make it more like the Euros. Took, 30 seconds to
So that's what I was going to say. Yeah. Send the email and then call and then and that's where it's when I kind of control it more. All right.
I was just gonna do it better. Before you write
make sure it's hard to have all this text and data. It take 45 minutes.
He said you can change the color.
So on the first one, so you guys are louder, you know, so I was like, he's not back yet.
I complained about it. I was like,
Yeah, I'm the red green card. It's what?
better than the past stuff.
So it's another package you buy from Jeffrey.
I haven't been on it for 2 years.
Yeah, we worked on,
So Jeffrey sells a product called Resharp.
tabs for a while. Yeah, there was these television.
This isn't the stuff from,
We're still in bankruptcy or something like that when I worked there, you know? That's me, that was out here. Actually, I worked with that CSG, CTM, and CRI. It was.
So we've got
Has it been a good turnout?
okay, so those products, you can change them to the store.
The one I mentioned was it's just always
Can you change it to where it's like underscores instead of
Gift certificates?
So the color settings are coming from Visual Studio. It's not coming from. Inside.